and welcome back to Classics and Ancient Mediterranean Studies 1103. Here's a Harry Potter trivia question coming at you. In what year does Harry become Quidditch captain? Courtesy of my daughter. Enjoy the lecture.
To demonstrate that this is the way the Iliad works, that the Iliad works both as a backdrop of the entire story of the Trojan War and as a microcosm that lets people meditate on what the story means, I want to turn to two different takes on the Iliad, one of them from ancient Athens around 460 BCE, and the other from a much more recent time in the 20th century in the poetry of William Butler Yeats. The chorus of Aeschylus's famous tragedy, the Agamemnon, the first of the three tragedies that make up the Oresteia, which means the story of Orestes, and which we'll read about later in the course, sing a song that is an extended meditation about the meaning of the Trojan War. And in that song, Aeschylus is not really talking about the mythic past as much as he's talking about what's going on in his own Athens, which has very recently successfully fought the Persians in order to maintain the freedom of Greece, as we learn above all in Herodotus. In fact, one of the reasons that the Trojan War ends up being such an important story for the Athenians to tell themselves is that they themselves have recently been engaged in a war with people who live in the East, indeed people who live in that very same Asia Minor where they imagine the Trojan War as having taken place. When the chorus of Agamemnon, these old men who have been left at home while the forces of Mycenae, or Argos as it's mythologized in the tragedy, have gone off to fight against Troy, when they sing about sending those men off to fight at Troy, they're really singing about what it means to send Athenians off to fight against the Persians, because even at the time when Aeschylus is writing his tragedy and the tragedy is being performed in Athens, mopping up operations are proceeding throughout the Aegean in order to drive the Persians off once and for all. And here's what the chorus sing in the wonderful translation of Richmond Lattimore. In all Hellas, for those who swarmed to the host, the heart-breaking misery shows in the house of each. Many are they who are touched at the heart by these things. Those they sent forth they knew. Now in place of the young men, urns and ashes are carried home to the houses of the fighters. The god of war, money changer of dead bodies, held the balance of his spear in the fighting, and from the corpse fires at Ilium sent to their dearest the dust, heavy and bitter with tears shed, packing smooth the urns with ashes that once were men. They praised them through their tears, how this man knew well the craft of battle, how another went down splendid in the slaughter, and all for some strange woman. Now I want to look at one particular metaphor from this song that the chorus sing, because I think it expresses really better than almost anything else how important the myth of Troy, as told in the Iliad, was to Aeschylus. What does this image mean? Ares who holds the scales of battle, money changer of dead bodies giving dust for gold. Well, it's based first of all on an image that comes from the Iliad itself of the scales of battle. That is, whoever is going to win the fight is like the side of a scale, and we're talking here about an old-fashioned scale that you see in images of the zodiacal sign Libra, where there are two pans connected to a beam, and whichever of the pans holds the heavier weight weights the beam down towards its side. And in the image of the scales of battle, that side is going to be the winning side, the side that's heavier. But Aeschylus completely transforms this image by having the god of war be a money changer of dead bodies. And with the image of the scales of battle, he conflates an image that would have been very, very familiar to his entire Athenian audience. That is, the scales of a money changer who, in ancient Greece, would have taken your money from one city and changed it into your money that you would use in Athens. And it would be something that was a symbol of Athenian power and of Athenian commerce as well. And the money changer would have done this by weighing how much your money was worth, literally in terms of how heavy it was. And according to his scales, he would have given you the money that you needed to buy things that you wanted in Athens. But here, instead of giving you something that's worth something, Ares is giving you ashes in exchange for the stuff of value that you sent in two fashions. One, all of the money you spent on the military expedition that went to Troy or into the Aegean. And two, more importantly, the people that you sent who were gold for you, who were worth something to you. That is, he takes your loved ones and he turns them into dust, the ashes that come back in the urns. That's all that's left of the people you loved. What I'm saying about this passage in relation to the Iliad is that Aeschylus is interpreting the myth of the Iliad with its questioning of what it means to be a hero against the backdrop of the Trojan War, the greatest conflict in history, and coming up with his own meditation on what's going on in his city of Athens. Now I want to take us to the modern example I talked about, the famous poem Leda and the Swan by W.B. Yeats. And I love to illustrate this poem with this print of Leonardo's because I think that the twisting of Leda's body and the twisting of the swan's neck give us an image of exactly the same kind of violence that Yeats wants us to think about when we're reading his poem. Together, Aeschylus and Yeats are going to get us into what I'm going to express in the next segment as the dominant motion of the Iliad. And I'm going to accompany that with two kind of sub-motions. But I'm going to call that dominant motion the transfer of strife. We saw in the passage of Aeschylus that the chorus are singing about how the strife over the strange woman, Helen, gets transferred to the death of their loved ones. Here Yeats is going to be talking graphically about the way the violence, the strife of the rape of Leda by Zeus leads to the destruction of Troy and then later the destruction of the house of Atreus that comes out of it, which is what's being described in Aeschylus's Agamemnon. A sudden blow, the great wings beating still above the staggering girl, her thighs caressed by the dark webs, her nape caught in his bill. He holds her helpless breast upon his breast. How can those terrified, vague fingers push the feathered glory from her loosening thighs? And how can body laid in that white rush but feel the strange heart beating where it lies? A shudder in the loins engenders there the broken wall, the burning roof and tower, and Agamemnon dead. Being so caught up, so mastered by the brute blood of the air, did she put on his knowledge with his power before the indifferent beak could let her drop? It's the whole story, right? It's everything from the rape of Leda that leads to the birth of Helena and Clytemnestra, to the destruction of Troy, to the destruction of the house of Atreus. The whole encompassing story of what the Greeks knew as the epic cycle in one poem, in one transfer of violence from a rape all the way through the story. And so Yeats understands, just as Aeschylus understands, the way the Iliad works. The way the Iliad is all of Troy and yet a microcosm that makes us question the whole idea that this kind of story is the kind of story we think it is. That it's a story of glory and heroism and that those things are completely good. So what I'm going to be expressing to you about the Iliad as we go on is that the Iliad is, in some sense, an anti-war story. But at the same time, as I like to say, being anti-war in ancient Greece was pretty much like it would be to be anti-gravity today. We shouldn't lose sight of the fact that war was absolutely a fact of life and something that it was impossible to imagine the end of.